Welcome into our interview with Tom Burnett. He is the chair of the men's basketball selection committee for the 2021-2022 season, and he is finishing up his 19th season, his final season as the commissioner of the Southland Conference. Tom, thank you for joining us. How you doing?
Doing great, Matt. Great to be with you and talking about hoops.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot to get to here. But I want to start big picture first. This college basketball season, men's college basketball season, as you kind of step back and assess, perhaps going off of some conversations and comments you've had in the room with committee members this week, what stands out to you about this season so far that we're in here over the past couple of months?
Well, I think we're all gratified, Matt, to be coming to the finish line. I think as we started this year, we had all the optimism in the world that we would play a complete, full schedule. We weren't able to do that a year ago, and certainly we know what happened back in 20. So I think that the idea that we would get back to normal certainly was a focus of our group, certainly, and all of the college basketball world. I would say that certainly the Omicron pause, if we want to call it that, during the season certainly has impacted a lot of programs, a lot of student athletes, but certainly gratified that it appears as if a lot of those makeup games are going to happen. We're going to have teams playing a more full schedule this year. So again, there's some gratification there as we come to the finish line that we are going to have this complete feeling, so to speak, of getting the season in. And of course, aiming toward March Madness when it's all said and done.
Yeah, on that specific note here, it does appear that most, if not all teams, will be able to clear the threshold for games played. There is a process in place where teams can submit a waiver if need be under consideration with that. But can you, for our audience, can you provide any relevant updates to how this process is different from what you went through with the committee a year ago? And in many ways, obviously, a return to normal. I spoke to Dan Gavitt. We ran a story about him on CBSSports.com about a month ago, maybe. But for the audience that's just catching up and wanting to know, okay, we're still technically in a pandemic. It's not a single site anymore. But what updates can you give about the changes, either back to normal or some different things about the selection process in the tournament this year?
Yeah, absolutely. A year ago, we were in just a completely different situation. We were hoping, we set the minimum at 13 games. So we were hopeful we would get, a couple of dozen or so games in. And, we weren't sure we were going to play postseason, but, hats off to, Dan Gavitt and the staff that you mentioned, the folks here in Indianapolis that put together just a terrific event and a first of its kind in a controlled environment. And, certainly I will tell you that since then, as grateful as we are for that, and, I would tell you in many regards, what they did here in Indy pretty much saved our enterprise in the NCAA. And, people understand the finances that are involved with all of that. To play that tournament was very important to all of us in Division I. I think what's different, obviously, this year is really an effort to get the tournament back on track, get it back to its course of 14 different sites, starting in Dayton, certainly continuing on through the first, second rounds, the regionals, and then on to New Orleans for the Final Four. If we can do that, that will be a huge goal of ours, an accomplishment for everyone involved in college basketball. And I know that we want to celebrate like we always have. I was in the room in 20 when we had to, shut the tournament down, and that was just an awful, horrible moment. And then the differences that we had last year. So getting it back on course is really a kind of a theme. If I had one as chair of the committee, is getting us back on course. And as I told the committee this week, we've got the policies and procedures in place. We know how to put the tournament together. We know how to get people excited or maybe angry at us for the matchups and all of that are ahead. But that's all documented on how to do that. Putting it back on course at the sites that we know it to be at, it's a main focus here. And I think we're getting very close to getting that accomplished.
Now, at the time we are talking here, the committee has adjourned for proper purposes here in advance of Saturday's in-season top 16 bracket reveal, 12:30 p.m. Eastern on CBS. But as usual, you do have the contingency in place if there are any games that are relevant to Thursday or Friday night. Should a team lose, that the bracket would reflect that when we get to Saturday. Is that correct, Tom?
That is correct. We do have some games tonight and Friday night, as you note, but the committee has gone through those contingencies, and we feel very confident on where we are and getting a little bit closer to that bracket reveal on Saturday, as you mentioned.
All right, on Saturday, we will be 22 days out from Selection Sunday. This year's in-season top 16 reveal is a week later than it has normally been over the previous 4 years since this process began. And again, just a one-time only show on CBS. Men's basketball only does it once leading up to the tournament. I much prefer that to college football's model of doing it 5, 6, 7 times there. But my question is this: do you anticipate this will be a one-time only a deal this year specifically with the timing of it? Normally we are a week earlier. We are a month out from Selection Sunday, but the NFL schedule pushed back this show by a week. So is it still experimental, kind of see how this is? Because you're kind of getting close to Christmas morning here. And while there's no guarantee anyone on any seed line on Saturday is going to maintain that when we get to Selection Sunday, there is something to be said for being a little bit more removed from Selection Sunday as opposed to just 3 weeks out.
Matt, I think we are all used to that, having it a little farther away from the selection. So we're closing in on 3 weeks, as you mentioned. We're not quite sure yet what the future holds. That will certainly be for the committee going forward after I depart. But, I think as we consulted with our television partners and such, that it was just best to do it now. And you're right, 3 weeks is close. And but as you mentioned, we've got a lot of basketball left. I believe the count is near 750 games remaining in the regular season. And then we've got all the conference tournaments. So a lot can change, even if it's just 3 weeks.
I'll throw a curveball to you here real quick, since you mentioned 750 games remaining. I assume maybe this got brought to your attention this week as you met with the committee. Do you happen to know how many cancellations there have been on the books here with men's college basketball this season? Was that brought up by chance?
I don't know that we're tracking on that. I think through our conference monitoring program, each committee member has a good sense of, what's happening in the SEC, what's happening in the Pac-12 or the Southern Conference. So everyone individually has a good sense of that. I think collectively, we didn't spend a whole lot of time on that. Anecdotally, we know that there are some teams that may not get every game in, but they're going to be very close to playing that full schedule that we mentioned.
I'll get into a little bit more of this process specifically this week with the top 16, but I wanted to ask you a big picture question first. In your opinion, from your perspective, when you get the call up that you're going to be able to serve on the men's selection committee, I've had plenty of former committee members say this is one of the true badges of honor in all of college athletics to be able to serve on this committee. It is a highly desirable position, an unpaid position, but a highly desirable position nonetheless. What you thought this job would be when you first took it, before you first took it, to what it is now. You are the chair. You are in your final season. What has been either different or grown the most within the confines of how the committee operates over the past 5 years, which obviously includes a tournament cancellation, still doing this in pandemic? If you kind of wrap it up for me and what you've learned and how it's changed over the past 5 years.
Well, I will tell you, Matt, when you get that call, and when Danny Gavitt called me, many years ago now, to tell me that I was being nominated and perhaps would be a candidate for this committee, it was a bit overwhelming. I have a history of working with the tournament over a 30-year career, backstage, a timeout coordinator for CBS for many years. So I was very familiar with the tournament and its operation, and certainly as a conference commissioner, it's a lifeblood for us at the mid-major level as well. So to get that call and be told that you're being considered for this, and then when you actually get it, it's kind of hard to believe, but you're right. It is quite an honor and a privilege to serve in this committee. I think not many of us at the FCS level of Division I get this opportunity. So it's all honor and privilege. And, you go through various stages of, do I really deserve to do this? And then you also realize that, hey, I have an opportunity to represent a big segment of what makes up Division I, and very proud to do that. So, when you think back over the changes, certainly, when I got here, we were still working with the RPI, as you recall. We made that change when I was here on the committee, and certainly we think that the net has, proven itself to be a very good sorting metric for the committee. But as you know, it's not our only tool that we have. Also too, you mentioned the shutdown from COVID, never having gone through that before. And that weighed very heavily on all committee members at the time. And, I think back to some of my predecessors, Kevin White, who had to chair the committee through that tough moment in 2020. And then Mitch Barnhart, who led us through the controlled environment last year. So there have been a lot of changes. We've also grown the committee. We're now at a 12-member committee. And this was really our first week to get together, kind of in the spaceship, so to speak, that I call it, where we've got all the monitors, all the information in front of us, and we're working through the selection, seating, bracketing process, even though it's just for a mock and for the reveal Saturday. In 3 weeks, we'll do it for real. So there have been a lot of changes here over this 5-year period. And again, just an honor and privilege just to be in the room, and something I'll cherish for the rest of my life.
I have a two-part question related to the committee. The first being, why the decision to expand from 10 to 12?
Well, I think there were a few things that were in play there. I think certainly the NCAA, as we all know, has been looking at more inclusive opportunities, diversity, equity opportunities for committees to grow. And could we have more representation from ethnic minorities, female candidates as well, as we move forward with the committee. But certainly in some of the other governance conversations, you've got the Power 5 conferences now who are all fully represented and will be as we go forward. But in expanding to 12, it's not just an advantage for the Power 5 conferences. Some of the other leagues, as you know, the next level of leagues that experience success, like let's say the Big East, for example, will have a pretty good shot at representation because of the success they have in the tournament. And then there's another opportunity for, I don't want to refer to us as the rest of us, but there's the other group of conferences that will continue to have good representation in the room. And that's certainly the case now. I feel very good about the mix we have. We have 8 athletic directors, 4 commissioners for the total of 12. And that seems to be a good mix and a good fit. And we'll see how the committee shapes up in the future. But I think we're all feeling really good about the mix right now.
Yeah, very note, though, how the committee shapes up in the future. I've been of the opinion that the NCAA and the committee have done a very good job over the past decade or so at actually evolving and kind of getting better. It's not a perfect system, but it's certainly better than it was in the 90s into the early 2000s. But I have been critical and remain critical of one component of this. I wanted to ask you, how serious did the NCAA consider examining bringing someone not at the conference commissioner or athletic director level onto the committee? The College Football Playoff Committee does this. And certainly when you speak about diversity, not just from ethnic backgrounds, but also different walks of life, wouldn't you think the committee might benefit from having 1 or 2 voices from outside, specifically having worked in the college environment, to just, if nothing else, just bring new voices, spice up that conversation? Would the selection and seating process not be better informed by that, Tom? Was that something that was seriously considered by the committee and by Dan Cabot and company?
I think as we talked about it over the last few years and we were approaching the expansion of the committee, those were items that were discussed. Ultimately, our committee has a say in kind of how we're formulated, but we don't kind of make up our own rules. That's a little bit higher up the ladder. There's a nominating committee in the Division I structure. Certainly, there's a board of directors that has final oversight of things. So there are other voices that get involved. And when you get a kind of a mandate from the board of directors down that all committees pick a sport, pick an issue in the NCAA, that we have a lot of committees, as you know. They all have to work toward, those goals of diversity and inclusion and perhaps other voices. I don't know that the basketball committee talked a whole lot about outside voices coming into the committee room. But again, at the end of the day, we're not quite sure that's really our decision. I think certainly, as you know, Matt, we hear a lot from the coaching community that could more coaches be involved. And that's just not where the committee has landed so far. They want administrators, they want the athletic directors primarily, and commissioners, although, you could have some variance there. But at the end of the day, I think that so far there's been some comfort in how the committees are structured. And we feel like, As you've mentioned, over time, we've gotten better. Our metrics are better that we work with. The process that we go through, very, very thorough with our conference monitoring. So I think right now I would kind of lean more toward, I feel pretty good about this, but very open to new ideas in the future. That's for sure.
Yeah, I can't help but interject. I do think the committee would be greatly benefited by having just a bit more diversity in voices and people from different walks of life. But that's a topic for down the road here. Don't want to keep you too long. Let's speak to the metrics. A little bit of refresher on the net rankings, if you will. I have a question for you. The net rankings, as probably they should, they just once we get to conference play in the season, you'll see the net rankings reflected and referenced in writing, on television shows, on podcasts, as much as maybe any other metric other than maybe KenPom, right? Can you explain to viewers just what exactly the net is and how it's used by the committee? And frankly, if you think it might be too emphasized in the college basketball's press by people that write about it, talk about it, gab about it, if maybe there's actually too much put on the net, because I do believe it's seen as the default ranking tool by the general college basketball audience.
Yeah, and I remember the same conversations were had when we used the RPI a few years ago, and we kind of all fell into that mode of believing the RPI kind of did everything for us. The net itself, as you're familiar with, Matt, but for the viewers here, it's really got two parts. It's got an adjusted net efficiency, which was really encouraged by the coaches committee, the community, I should say. The NABC executive board really wanted us to modernize the metric a few years ago, and bringing in efficiency. You mentioned KenPom. There's other metrics out there that utilize efficiency metrics as well. And then we've got the other parts, the team value index, which is the algorithm that continues to evolve as we move through the season. It's winning and losing. It's the opponent, it's the location, and it's the outcome. And again, it's an ever-changing metric, a part of the metric that I think anyone other than maybe a physics professor would have a hard time explaining how it all maps out. But in the end, I think what we learned as we got into the net, we had a comfort with it. It looked to be true as we compared it to other metrics, even comparing it to the old RPI at times. It's different, but it allows the committee to certainly maybe not make all of our decisions, but maybe base some of the things that we do on that. But as you know, on the team sheet, we're looking at KenPom, we're looking at BPI, we're looking at everything that might be out there, and then we're reading everything. I'm reading what you put out. I'm seeing what other voices talk about, about our sport. So we're taking all of that in, and certainly the net plays a role in what we do as a committee, but it's not everything. And I will tell you that certainly there's no circumstance where net wins the day. Net makes us look at other things. That's kind of my experience in the committee room. Why is their net so high? Why are they so good in the predictives versus the results metrics as well? So, there's a lot of combination. It's a big soup, and there's a lot of things in it. But at the end of the day, we've got 12 voices who feel pretty good about that metric and what we can do with it going forward.
What about a metric like strength of record, which I think is a very important one, is a results-based metric. It has no predictive elements to it whatsoever. It can often indicate with schools like, say, Providence, and I'm not going to ask you to speak to specific schools here, but I will mention the schools. It can offer up, frankly, very interesting conversations. Can you speak to the conversations you might have had without obviously naming teams? I get the rules here, Tom, but the conversations you might have just had earlier this week about how you are balancing what different metrics are telling you, and the conversations that happen in that committee room when you have certain teams that might have high profile mainstream wins that run in contradiction to where they might stand. Again, I'm just going to invoke a team here. You don't have to speak to them specifically. Rutgers is coming off 4 straight wins against NCAA tournament quality teams, and it bumped up from 81st all the way to 75th in the net, just to use one metric in particular. How does the committee at large overall kind of handle, debate those kinds of teams? We all know Rutgers isn't going to be in the top 16, but you have these fascinating cases with multiple metrics. Can you at least take us inside the committee room and explain how those debates play out and how committee members try and get their own thoughts together about how to sort these teams in any kind of order?
Well, I will tell you that a lot of the committee members, including myself, we have the same questions. We'll see something that we're not quite sure. Why is that the number? Why is it 75? Why is it 15? And we spend a lot of time, certainly talking within the committee. Certainly, as you know, David Warlock here on the NCAA staff is kind of the resident expert on the various metrics and does a really great job of explaining why this looks like this, why this looks like that. You mentioned a team that may be on a hot streak. You mentioned Rutgers. Rutgers is a great story. It's wonderful, and we're watching. We're observing this just like everyone else. That we're not ignoring anything that's happening out there. As you know, you've heard from us before, Matt. We're talking about the full body of work. So we're including everything from the start in November all the way through the conference tournaments, and that will factor into what we do. So, but there's a lot of conversation about why metrics shape up the way they do. What does this number mean? And we may not get to all the final answers, but it's certainly a big part of the conversation. And I think that's what our membership wanted us to do a few years ago, was to bring that discussion more into the committee room, get away from what used to be known as the eye test, and just looking at someone and saying they're a good team, or maybe they're not a good team. They're in the bracket, they're not in the bracket. We certainly don't want to do that. We want to be able to back up the information we share and reveal, whether it's this weekend or it's the real thing in 3 weeks.
In classic Eye on College Basketball podcast fashion, I've gone past my expected time. I will get you out of here quickly, but I have 3 more quick ones. First one is this. We don't know if there's going to be a team from a mid-major conference that winds up in that precarious position, right? They have a pretty good record. Metrics are maybe a little iffy, but they were not afforded the opportunities in non-conference play because we know how the game is played. A lot of these big conference schools will not play teams at the mid-major level when they are expected to be good. As someone who is the commissioner of a mid-major league, how much emphasis personally do you put on at least bringing it to the conversation, Tom, of like, okay, the resume is what it is, but we also need to take into account real world factors where this team wasn't even afforded a second, third, fourth, fifth opportunity to get a quad 1 game. How do you account for, or at least try and account for, at least having that discussion of we need to at least take this into account? This team would have had better Q1, Q2 opportunities if teams from power conferences had agreed to play them.
Well, it's a great point, and you're right. And in my day job, I represent one of those conferences, and so certainly separating maybe my time before I was on the committee, I spent certainly a lot of time on that. Were we given the opportunities to do what we need to do in the regular season? And yes, there is a disparity between the opportunities that some schools have versus others, and it's very concerning, really, by everyone in the room. And I think what we've done, and I'm pretty proud of this during my time on the committee, and it probably before I got on the committee as well. I think the committee is real good to recognize, a team out there that may not get those opportunities. But in those few opportunities they do have, did they take full advantage of that? Were they able to, make a mark? Maybe they only get 3 games in quad 1, but, were they 0-3? Were they blowout losses, or was it the flip? Were they 2-1? Did they go on the road and beat a Power 5 school? So all of that, again, is part of the mix. And certainly I feel pretty good. And we've got a lot of other mid-major voices in the committee room. So it's not just one of us against the Power 5 or anything like that. So I feel very good about the kind of the fair shake that the mid-majors are given. Certainly we understand that, that's in the eye of the beholder. And if you're part of a program that doesn't feel like it's getting a fair shake, that's unfortunate, but it's not because the committee is not making the effort to do that.
Schools like South Dakota State, Murray State, Wagner, perhaps Belmont. Keep that in mind as we move forward. It'll be interesting to see over the next few weeks. How many teams were in consideration for the one line for the Saturday top 16 reveal, and how many teams were in consideration, period, to be included in the top 16 overall seeds?
Yeah, I think that for the number 1 seed line, I think the legitimate discussions were probably up to 6 or 7 programs. Certainly as we've gotten into conference play, we've had some results that, teams are not going to be perfect. They're going to lose games and such. And, we've got to take that into account. And again, remember the entire body of work. So, we're looking at, at least a half dozen teams that we think were, really valid candidates for the number 1 seed line. I think overall, we were usually at about 20 or so teams when we focus in on the top 16 reveal. As you know, the process, we go through an extensive scrubbing exercise as well. And we went through, I believe, 3 scrubbing exercises. We also have to scrub based on the possible contingencies ahead. So we've done quite a bit of that in a limited manner, of course. When we do it for real, it will be for all 68 seeds in 3 weeks. But feel really good about the process and just really happy with where we are.
And before you get out of here, the bracket as it stands now, let's not even worry about contingencies that might need to kick in for Thursday night results. Is there any team that might be on a line that had to be moved because of bracket contingencies and principles? Sometimes teams, because of what conference they might play in or rematches, might have to get shifted. Any of that we might need might need to keep an eye out for on Saturday?
Well, so far, and again, we're only talking about the first 4 seed lines, but
right.
No changes yet. Certainly, we'll see if that gets a little more complicated when we do this for real in 3 weeks.
Okay, last question. You're leaving. You're getting on a bird here in a minute. Next time the selection committee will convene in person is what date? And will that be in the usual spot of Indianapolis, or will it be back in New York, which is what the committee did a couple of years pre-pandemic?
We're going to come back here to Indianapolis. We're going to meet. We're going to sequester. As you know, we come in on Tuesday night of selection week and really get to work Wednesday morning. We'll have some starts and stops. As you know, we'll have to stop and watch some of the conference tournament play, and then ultimately get into Friday night, really into Saturday, go late Saturday night, and hopefully come out of Saturday night with the 1 through 68 seed line, and then be able to come back, review that Sunday morning, and then get into our bracketing practice. So we'll have a full week for sure, but we'll be gathered back together, not going to New York this year, but for selections, but here in Indianapolis, which for a lot of us in college athletics is our home away from home.
Tom, thanks for giving us some time here on the Eye on College Basketball Podcast YouTube channel. For anyone watching, hope you enjoyed and learned something. If you have not already, please be sure to hit that like button. We appreciate your time, Tom. We'll see you on Saturday with the selection reveal, and of course next month on Selection Sunday. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Matt.